thank you so much to Vivienne Hayes from WRC for being with us here today. Hi, Viv. Could you just start by explaining a bit about who WRC are and what you do there?
Hi, thanks, Laura. Yeah, so WRC, the Women's Resource Centre, is the national umbrella body for the women's sector. We have about 800 in our network and growing, and we estimate that there are approximately 20,000 women's charities, groups and organisations in the UK working across all aspects of women's lives to support them and to address what really is the impact of women not having their full human rights in this country. And we do lots of different things. We're particularly keen on building collaboration and partnerships across organisations, because evidence shows that the most critical factor in improving women's human rights is the independent, collective, women-only action for change. So we are very keen to support that.
That's great, thank you. And I think you sort of began touching on this, the importance of women fighting for women's human rights, but I wondered if you could just explain a bit about what the current state of women's human rights is in the UK, and reflecting on the impact of recent government legislation and proposed reforms, and what the impact that's had on the lived experience of women in the UK.
I think, sadly, women's human rights at the moment are arguably at an all-time low. Since the women's sector began about 50 years ago. And you can see that if you look at different research into women's economic position, information and statistics around violence against women and girls, the so-called gender pay gap, access to childcare. I mean, the list goes on. And if you also look at our work on the UN Bill of Rights for Women, or CEDAW, you can comprehensively see how the lived experiences of women are bearing out the fact that our rights and our human rights are not being met and actually going backwards. Some examples currently from the government's total disregard for what we are over half the population, and government's total disregard to meet women's human rights can be seen through their consultation on the Human Rights Act, which looks like they want to replace it and weaken it, and limit access to legal challenge, which already is limited because of obviously the lack of legal aid. You can see that in the Domestic Abuse Act, which excludes whole swathes of women, and in particular Black and minoritized women. So we can see that this government's trajectory through their bills, and then if we look at the Nationality and Borders Bill and the Police Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill, we can see that government are really turning the screws on with sexist and racist policy making. And this is all happening at a rate of knots, with lots of women's orgs and other human rights defenders trying to challenge this. And it's interesting that some of the gains that have been made have really come from the House of Lords, which, you know, 20 years ago, we would have been aghast to think that the House of Lords would be the place that showed more concern for our rights than the House of Commons, but that does seem to be the case. And so there's a lot going on that is repressing our rights, and it's extremely worrying. And as I said before, the thing that evidence and history shows is that it's the collective action of women that holds our rights or improves them. And so that's something that we are keen to support, facilitate, make happen in any way we can. But again, we've got challenges ourselves in the sector around being able to build solidarity. We've got a lack of investment in the sector, which some work that WRC is doing and will be released soon shows shocking figures for the amount of money that goes into the sector. Absolutely shocking. We've also got the environment of competitive tendering for grants and contracts, which has broken down the solidarity that we've had in the past and is very detrimental to collaborative working. We've also got continuing racism within the sector, which again affects solidarity, but it also affects the way that we do our work and who we're centering in the work. Because if we're not looking at the poorest and most marginalised women, who will be Black and minoritized women, disabled women, working class women, then we're not going to come up with sufficient remedies that meet the needs of all women. So that work is critical.